All right. Well, today we're here to receive and to converse with two very special people. The event is meant to empower the Latino community, and as we empower the Latino community, we're empowering ourselves as well, because we're all connected. My name is Jelena Sánchez. I'm an assistant professor of Spanish here, and welcome to tonight's event. Now, for the people on Zoom, you can, if you have questions at all, please write them in the chats, and we'll try to get them at the end of this evening. I'd like to introduce two very important judges, honorable judges, René Cruz and Bianca Camargo. Thank you very much for being here. They're from the 16th Judicial Circuit Court, Kane County, and they're here to tell us a little bit about their personal stories, their professional trajectories, and also about the demographics of the Latino community, the challenges and the contributions of the Latino community. Please take up questions you'd like to ask them throughout the go ahead, have the conversation. Actually, finish telling us a little bit about yourself. We're going to begin with Judge Bianca Camargo. And Judge Camargo is from Aurora originally, graduated at the College of Law from Northern Illinois University. She's of Mexican descent. Camargo was a prosecutor with the Kane County State's Attorney's Office for over 10 years. And she really has had much experience in several different types of units, for example, pre-arraignment court, traffic and misdemeanor, domestic violence, DUI, general felony, and drug unit, among others. And want to tell us about yourself. So welcome, Judge Camargo.
Thank you. So just to kind of start off, a couple of things. Midway through my morning court call this morning, I realized I forgot to put my earrings on, and I thought to myself, that's why I feel off, because I stick to my mom's old saying, which is I feel naked if I don't have my earrings on. And so if I'm a little off, it's because I'm missing my earrings. Just kidding. And then the second thing is I really like to talk with my hands, so being tied to a mic is very hard for me, but I'm going to do the best that I can. Thank you for that introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here to give you a little bit of information about myself and Judge Cruz. You know, to say that this is an honor to be here and be in this position is really an understatement. I am so blessed to be in this position. And once you hear a little bit about my story, maybe it'll make a little bit more sense. But, you know, I was recently appointed by the Illinois Supreme Court in July of this year. And I thought, I can't believe that this is happening. And then somebody brought it to my attention, you know, you're the first Latina circuit judge that Kane County has ever seen. And that statement brought me to tears, because I thought, how can that be? Kane County has had circuit judges for over 100 years. How can I be the first Latina circuit judge? But that really lit a fire under me, because I was appointed by the Illinois Supreme Court, but I have to win an election in order to keep my position. So I'm very hopeful that I will be able to win that race, and I'm giving it everything that I have because it means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to my community. So a little bit of how I became to this position is, you know, I've been serving my community for the last 15 years. I started my career as a victim advocate at the Kane County State's Attorney's Office. And in that role, my job was to help victims of violent crimes. I would explain the court process to them. I would sit in court with them during trials. And during that time frame, my eye would always be focused on the prosecution. I was in awe of all the work that they were putting into their cases and everything that they were doing for the victims and for the community. And I thought to myself, one day I'm sitting in there during a murder trial, and I thought to myself, Bianca, maybe it's time for you to go to law school. And that thought scared me, right? Because at that point, I was the first person in my entire family that had ever graduated with a bachelor's degree. So the thought of going to a postgraduate, I was like, where do I go for answers? How do I get help? How do I apply? No one that I knew had gone to law school in my family. So that thought scared me a little bit. And I'll tell you that I confided in one attorney at the state's attorney's office. And I closed the door and I said, listen, I have something I have to tell you. And he's like, what, are you quitting? I'm like, no, I want to go to law school. And he looked at me very seriously and he said, well, then go. And his statement to me just kind of caught me off guard because I'm like, it's not that easy. Like, how do I do this? So I did what I always do, and I started researching and getting all this information, collecting all my letters, and took the practice exam. And I thought to myself, okay, if the practice exam comes out good, you're in good shape and you'll get in. And luckily I was able to get in, and I went to NIU, and I thought, okay, I will do everything I need to do to get through, as long as I do everything I did in undergrad, which is just work hard. You know, I'll put in my time after class. Fast forward 1 week into law school, I go to my mailbox, and in there's a little pamphlet, and I pull it out, and it says, how to pass the bar exam as a minority. And I thought to myself, what? I mean, I'll pass the bar exam like everyone else. I'll just work hard. But I read the pamphlet, and they had all these statistics about, you know, Latinos, they don't pass the bar exam. Minorities, most minorities don't even take the bar exam. And I thought to myself, this can't be me. Like, this can't be it. And so that pamphlet gave me even more motivation, because I'm the type of person that if you tell me that I can't, watch me that I will. And so that's how the pamphlet really motivated me. And if I was studying 4 hours, it turned into 8 hours. And I did everything I could to make sure that I graduated from law school, that I took the bar, and I passed the bar. And I was lucky enough that I did in 2010 pass the bar exam. And, you know, one of the main reasons, like I said, to go to law school was to become a prosecutor. And I wanted to be a prosecutor, not just in any county. I wanted to be a prosecutor in the county that I lived in. I wanted to serve the community that I was living in. And so luckily in 2010, I was able to get a job with the state's attorney's office as a prosecutor. And that's where I stayed for the last 11 years. And I was so incredibly lucky to have that job. And it was more than a job. You know, I call it a job, but it was my life. I mean, I loved it. I loved trial work. I loved arguing to the jury. You know, I'm not a big fan of talking in front of people, but arguing to a jury was something completely different. It was my life. I'd come in on the weekends, I'd stay late on the weekdays, just to make sure that I was prepared and I was ready to go. During this entire time frame of being a prosecutor, I also worked a second job, and that was kind of to make ends meet, because being a prosecutor doesn't pay all that great, but I wanted to be a prosecutor, and I was willing to do anything to make sure that I could stay working there. And so in the last 11 years, as a prosecutor, I tried all types of cases. I did murder cases, drug cases, victim sensitive cases like domestic batteries, child victims, sexual assaults. All of that experience, really, I didn't know it at the time, but that hard work and all that experience that I was putting in was preparing me for my next stage of life that I didn't even know was going to happen. And I'll tell you that towards the end of that 11 years, something happened, and that was COVID. And COVID really put a damper on my career and my mood at the state's attorney's office. You know, during COVID, we stopped doing jury trials, and jury trials was like my bread and butter. That's what I love to do. That's what I lived for. And when we stopped doing it, it got kind of quiet up here. And I started thinking to myself, maybe it's time to move on and go learn a different area of law. And right as I was about to transition from the state's attorney's office to Kane County, one of the chief judge from Kane County gives me a call and says, there's something that I want you to do. I want you to put in an application for a circuit judge spot here in Kane County. And at first I thought maybe he marked the wrong number, but I listened to what he had to say, and you really didn't have to convince me. Obviously, I think every lawyer secretly wants to be a judge, whether they want to admit that or not. But after, my conversation with him, I thought to myself, you know what, put in for it, see what happens. I will tell you that as I'm filling out this application, I thought to myself, there's no way you're going to get this. There's no way a girl like you this just isn't for you. This is not going to happen. This is not going to happen. And that's what I kept telling myself. So I was shocked that after the application process and you know, interviewing with the Supreme Court justice, and you want to talk about being nervous, interviewing with the Supreme Court justice, but he was so incredibly nice. But after that interview and getting this call, I just couldn't believe it, but I was so thankful. And again, it didn't hit home until someone told me, you're the first Latina circuit judge. And that's when things really changed for me. I started looking inward and thinking to myself, this appointment is not about you. This appointment is what it means to your community. That now they see a circuit judge who has different responsibilities than the associate judges that we have, that's in a position to vote in associate judges, vote on local rules, policy and procedures that affect our community. That's you, and they see you. And now they, from the bench, where I am now at the Aurora Branch Court, where the majority of the people that walk through my courtroom are Spanish speaking, now they see someone that looks like them, that understands them, that knows their struggles, who can speak to them in their language. And that's huge. And that's what my point is. This appointment, it's not about me. It's about the people that I'm going to be serving. And that is a huge sense of pride for me. So like I started off saying, I'm so thankful for being in this position and all the opportunities that come along with it. That's a little bit of my, you know, upbringing and how I came to be here, but I don't want to take up too much time because I know we have an hour and I know Judge Cruz wants to give his side. So.
Thank you very much.
You get all this.
The first Latina well, she also graduated from Northern University and is a very involved person in the community as well. Works a lot in family matters, focus criminal justice advice for received an award, right? This summer, I believe in June, the Kane County, well, the award for Association of Community Service Award, and that must have been as well for all the work that you do for Aurora and the Latino community. So please help me welcome Judge.
All right, good evening, everyone. So I'm going to start off a little bit non-traditional here. How many of you have seen the play, whether it's in person or on I think it's on Disney, Hamilton? Raise your hands for me, please. So about half the room have seen Hamilton. How many of you have seen In the Heights, either the play or the musical? So actually a little bit more In the Heights than Hamilton. So I'm going to tie that up here in a minute because I had an event last week and I admitted for the first time publicly my somewhat unhealthy fascination with Hamilton. Now, Hamilton's something that has reached across the world, across every age, culture, the story of one of our founding fathers, and I'll explain to you how that ties into me. And basically, it's because I never expected to be a judge. I didn't expect I'd be standing in front of you. I was born in Panama. My father's Puerto Rican, my mother's Panamanian. My mother was pregnant with me when my father was in the U.S. Army. And she was pregnant with me in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and my father got sent back to Vietnam for his second tour of duty. And my mom decided to come home to Panama so she could be surrounded by family when I was born. And my father and I met for the first time when I was 9 months old after he finished his tour in Vietnam. And being in a military family, if you're familiar with it, we moved around a lot. So I spent my first 5 years in Panama. We lived in Kansas, one of the coldest places you'll ever be, for 5 years. And we came up to Fort Sheridan up in Waukegan for 3 years, got sent to Virginia for 3 years. And then my dad's last duty station before he retired was back in Panama. So I actually graduated from high school at a military Department of Defense high school in Panama. I had the desire to be in the military because I appreciated what the military did for our family. I wanted to serve. So I went to a military college in South Carolina, did 4 years of Air Force ROTC with the intention of being a navigator for the Air Force and flying airplanes. And in the middle of my college career, the wall fell in Germany and communism ended and they didn't need as many soldiers anymore. So I was disqualified because of asthma. And I was a political science major, which gave me two options, teach or go to law school. And going to law school was a fascination for me. Those who knew me back then knew I loved to argue, so it made sense. So then I came up to DeKalb and got my education at Northern Illinois University College of Law. Now, one of the beauties of going to NIU was that the cost of education was very small, and it allows you to have more options when you graduated from law school. So when I say more options, is the less debt I had, the more options I had as to where I wanted to work. I could go open my own business. I could work in the service for public defender, state's attorney, et cetera. And I ended up working for a small firm, excuse me, after I did a short little stint in the state's attorney's office. And being bilingual, the need in Aurora, because I live in Aurora, there were no bilingual law firms in Aurora where individuals who had needs and spoke Spanish as their primary language could go to get their needs met by someone they could speak to in their primary language. So my law partner and I at Gill opened up the small law firm. When we started off, we had one full-time receptionist and a part-time secretary. And that was back in, I graduated in 1995. So in 96, 97, right around then we started. When I became a judge in 2012, we went from that small little office to a 20,000 square foot building with 7 lawyers and almost 26 staff. And that's somewhat of a testament to what the community in Aurora needed as far as representation, as well as the hard work we put in to service that particular underserved community in Aurora, which was a Latino community. Anything that someone would need through the surrounding counties, we could do it for them in the Spanish language. And we did it at affordable prices for them because we know that the need was great. So I did that for about 17 years. And when I mentioned that I didn't intend to be a lawyer, is I was passionate about what I did in that community. I was passionate about what our law firm meant to that community. So when the chief judge at the time reached out to me and said, Renee, I'd like you to apply to be a judge. I said, no. I wasn't interested in the sense that I felt like my commitment was to my community. And I did a lot of different things. I was the president of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I was on a number of boards. So I loved what I did. I loved being involved with people. And so that conversation went away. And then about 6 months, a year later, he sees me again. He says, Renee, I'd like you to apply to be a judge. I said, no, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. So here's where I'm going to go back to my initial question. In the Heights, the two things in the Heights and Hamilton have in common is Lin-Manuel Miranda is the author, composer who put those two together. Now, In the Heights came around that time. And that was a story basically about this small little community in New York where all these Caribbean nations live, their descendants live, and they tell their story. And you learn about the sacrifices a lot of people made just to make it to this country and the struggles that they had so that others wouldn't have to struggle. And so the main character in that musical was just looking to get out of there and go back to the Dominican Republic, which is where he was. And as he's pulled in different directions and he's about to get on that plane, he realizes that his real place was to stay where he was, but to make a bigger difference. And it got me thinking. And I don't know, I'm one of those individuals who's fascinated with talking to people that are older than me. I'm fascinated by hearing their stories. I'm fascinated about hearing the challenges that they've overcome. And it made me start thinking about my own parents and the sacrifices they made to help me get through school and support me through law school. And my grandmother, who grew up in a real part of the mountains of Panama, who tells me stories about the first time an airplane flew over and they all hid under the kitchen table because they didn't know what it was. But I started examining where I was at that point. And although I was doing a lot of productive work I felt for the community, that chief judge, who happened to be Black, said, think about the impact that you would have to be the first Hispanic judge in Kane County, because we had over 40 judges. The population in our county was almost 35% Hispanic. We had 0 Hispanic judges. And at that point, I said, you're right. And I started embarking on that process. And there was a little bit of a community outcry as to why. Why don't we have Hispanic representation? And I knew that at the point in my career, the things I'd accomplished, that I would be a good candidate for it. And even as I went around to interview with other judges, they would all say to me, well, we hear these rumors that we need a Hispanic judge. And I said, I'm not sitting here as a Hispanic judge. I'm sitting here as what I believe is the most qualified applicant you have. The fact that you realize I'm Hispanic means that you might recognize that there's a flaw and that you might need to address it. But it was that musical that had me thinking about it. So when I got sworn in as the first Hispanic judge, there was fanfare. I'm in the newspaper all the time. People laugh, people celebrating. And then what? Now I got to do the job. And being the first is great, but if you're the only one, I consider that a failure. So I had to start working on changing the narrative within the courthouse itself. Now, I have wonderful colleagues, but I quickly learned that going from being the founder and principal in a large law firm with almost 30 employees to coming into being the newest judge on the totem pole, I had a lot to learn, and I had to sacrifice by starting from the bottom. But I also had to prove to everybody else that not only was I qualified to be there, that I could improve the systems that were around me. One of the things I needed to do was to show them that my hard work and dedication made me just as equal as everybody else. And I also then, a few years later, because of that, the Supreme Court elevated me to a circuit judge position like Judge Camargo is now, and that put me in the decision room. Once I got into the decision room, now I have the voice, and I'm sitting at the table where policy gets determined, where we get to select new judges, where we get to broaden individuals' minds as to the direction that our circuit should take. So when Judge Camargo indicates that she was just appointed in the last 9 years, I'll hit my 9-year anniversary in December, we now have 5 Hispanic judges in Kane County in 9 years. We appointed our second Black judge last year. We have an Indian American judge as well. If you walk through our courthouse now, we do have a public defender here with us. You'll see that we now have Black security officers, or we didn't have them before. We have Black bailiffs. We didn't have those people. Those bailiffs were not Black either. So we've diversified throughout. The state's attorney's office is hiring diverse candidates as well. So the impact of being in the building and being visible and showing that you can contribute starts to get contagious. And people start to realize the benefits of it. When you go to law school, they're looking for diverse populations of individuals because that diversity in background and thought contributes to the overall learning of everybody. I remember going to law school with retired Air Force pilots, with the doctor, with a homemaker, with all sorts of individuals who could bring in those different perspectives that made the overall experience better. And when I talk about Hamilton, for those of you that have seen Hamilton, my fascination, I've actually seen it in person 6 times. Again, it's a little bit unhealthy, but I admit to it. And I've probably mowed the lawn 1,000 times listening to the soundtrack. And there's the one part at the very end, if you remember, it happens at the duel. And when Hamilton is trying to decide, what does he do? He talks about his shot, and he talks about legacy. When he mentions legacy, which is also the theme of In the Heights, because they also mention legacy in that as well. But I looked at In the Heights as my personal story, being Hispanic and hearing a Hispanic tale of people from the Caribbean talking about how they've succeeded in this country. And I look at Lin-Manuel Miranda, who's Puerto Rican ancestry. He was able to translate that story into a story that everybody could relate to, because he's talking about a founding father. And he talks about legacy, and he says, legacy is about planting seeds that you may never get to see, which means we don't do things so that we can celebrate them ourselves. We do them so that the people that come behind us do not have to take the same steps that we did. It's the same thing that our fathers and grandparents and everyone did for us. He continues to talk about legacy, and he says, he wrote the beginnings, the lyrics to a song that someday someone else will sing to me, which again, the founding fathers started that process. It's up to each one of us to add our own stanza, to add our own chorus, so that continues. He describes it as America, the great unfinished symphony you sent for me, a place where orphans and immigrants can leave their fingerprints and rise up. He talks about he's running out of time. Rise up, eyes up. My unhealthy relationship with Hamilton is the challenge that I feel on a regular basis to constantly look to improve whatever process I'm involved in. For me, my chosen profession is the law. It may not be for you, but the challenge is the same. The obligation is the same. Use those lyrics that were before you to then create your own, because there's people coming behind you that are going to need it. Unhealthy or not, who knows? But that's how I pursue everything now. And again, I didn't want to be a judge because I didn't realize the impact it would have. But now, having been in the position, I understand that not only did the community need it, it was the right thing to do, and it's what needs to continue, not just with the 5th, but the 6th, the 7th. So at some point, you're not just seen as the first Hispanic judge, the 5th Hispanic judge, you're just seen as a good judge. Thank you.
Cruz. And here, one of the goals of tonight is also give representation to our Latino students. We now have approximately 18% Latino, and it's quickly growing. And so now I guess my next question would be, if you could talk to us a little bit about the Latino community, the demographics, changes, contributions, leadership that you see happening right now at this moment as a community member and also as judges.
So the difficulty, so when I was president of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, I went out to visit all the Hispanic businesses and said, what do you need? And the one resounding response I received was, they need to be able to celebrate their heritage. And for those of you that might be familiar with Aurora, the Fiestas Patrias is the independence celebration, and it happens on September 16th for the Mexican community, but Hispanic History Month is September 15th to October 15th. There's a number of Latin American countries that all have their Independence Day mixed in there. But they had not had the opportunity to celebrate that festival for about 9 years at that time. And I was expecting, you know, we need help with zoning, we need help with City Hall. No, it was, we just don't feel that we can celebrate our identities in the second largest city in the state, mind you, with almost 40% Hispanic population. So that was my task. And so it took me about 18 months to go around and figure out what all the problems were, meet with everybody necessary. And then we actually were able to hold the first Fiestas Patrias in 10 years of the Mexican bicentennial. Now, mind you, I'm not Mexican, but I knew that that was what the community was calling for. And we put that together. And that sense of identity now, we see entrepreneurism in the Mexican community, especially Hispanic females. Who are now business owners and out there basically, you know, being at the forefront of innovation and enterprise that we didn't see before. But it's that openness to be for your identity in the community that I don't think existed before. The population, so I don't know if you mentioned this or not, I'm currently running for Supreme Court of Illinois. We have 7 Supreme Court justices in the state. They just redistricted, and the new district that's carved out is almost 30% Hispanic. And when I tell you that I have to act now, that's my next challenge right now, is because if we can accomplish that here locally, there's no reason we can't accomplish that throughout the 5 counties that I'm currently going to be running in, because the identity needs to exist everywhere. So that spirit of entrepreneurism, patriotism, all that is accessible and available to everyone. Because the numbers continue to grow, and you know that the contribution that we should all realize from the Latin community is there. It's just a matter of opening the floodgates for it to continue.
Is it the same question you want me to answer?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, one of the things that when we're talking about Aurora and Aurora businesses, I'll tell you a little story, and I hate to admit this in front of Judge Cruz, but when I was a prosecutor, a young prosecutor, and the Gill Law Group would come in, you know, you would be they were like stars in the city of Aurora, because they were doing something huge. They had the biggest law firm on the corner of Broadway and Pierce Street with their huge name on the side of the building. And every time I drove by it, I had such a sense of pride, because those were Latinos that were like doing it, you know, and it was just like, you didn't see a lot of that when I was coming up. So much has changed. The city of Aurora is thriving so much, especially with Judge Cruz is right. The women in Aurora are killing it, for a lack of better words. You know, when I got appointed, and you know, everyone, you're in the news and everybody wants to talk to you. I'm a part of these little groups on Facebook, and one of them is called Women Empowering. And so I go to their meetings every month, and all it is Latina women that are starting their own business, catering businesses. There's these 3 women, they call themselves a real estate trifecta. You know, they are, one's a real estate agent, the other one's a loan officer, and then the other one they do home inspections. I mean, they're teaming up and killing the real estate market in Aurora. You have a real estate agent here from Aurora, Viviana Vargas. I mean, she's doing everything she can to make sure that she's helping the Latino community, trying to change forms to make sure that they're in Spanish, forms that have never been touched before, that I guess the real estate entities that don't want to change it, but she's doing everything she can to try to serve her community. And that is a sense of pride from someone who's born and raised in Aurora and seeing how the community is responding to the Latinos and how the demographics are changing. So it is really, really inspiring to see that. And just, you know, this past weekend, I'm trying to remember my days, this past weekend, Aurora celebrated First Fridays. And that whole theme was Dia de los Muertos. 10 years ago, that's not something you would have seen. First of all, they probably wouldn't have been doing First Fridays, but now the fact that they even centered it around a Latino theme, I mean, it was beautiful. You could walk the entire downtown area and every street had something dedicated to, you know, either ballet folclórico or pan de muerto con chocolate, ofrendas, everything. I mean, it's really a wonderful thing to see. And I'm so thankful that I'm a part of that and that that's my community. And we're really embracing the Latino community. To kind of trickle into the court system, you know, I have probably, I would say out of any given court call, I probably have about, if there's 80 people in the courtroom, I would say 40 of them are Spanish speaking. And the one thing that I really pride myself on, and I don't have a court reporter, so I don't have to use an interpreter. I'm the one that goes over the plea paperwork with them. I'm the one that talks to them about waiving their right to a jury trial. And it makes me feel good that I can do that I don't have to use somebody else. And as soon as they, you know, I'll call their names and they'll approach and they'll say interpreter. And I'm like, oh, sí, yo te puedo ayudar. Like I say, oh, yes, I can help you. And they're all like, oh, hablas español? And I'm like, oh, yes. You know, it's good because they also feel now a sense of trust. They automatically trust you because they know that you can help them in their language. And to that end, you know, that's one of the things that I'm striving so much. You know, people are like, well, what are you trying to do in the court? What's your thing? You know what my thing is to make sure that, you know, in the last couple of years, and I saw this at the end of my time as a prosecutor, is, you know, the criminal justice system, with what you see on the media and the way things are changing, the community doesn't trust the criminal justice system, not just police officers, that's trickling all the way up to the judiciary. And so my whole platform is to rebuild what we've lost. And I think that's easy to do. The way to do it is that you treat everyone fairly, you listen to them, you really truly give them their day in court. You make sure that they have a clear understanding of what's going on in their case so that they make informed decisions. And the bottom line, and by far the most important thing, is that you treat them with respect. That last component goes so incredibly far. I have had so much feedback in my courtroom, and it makes me feel so good because sometimes you're up there and you wonder, am I doing this right? But I've had feedback from people walking out of the courtroom. Thank you. Thank you just for what you said about the respect thing. That really touched me. Or someone else on the chat the other day on Zoom said, I just want to tell you, thank you for always being so respectful to me in the courtroom. You know, these are people that think that I'm going to judge them because they're here on a traffic ticket or whatever they've done in their past. I think a lot of people that have court think to themselves, that judge, she knows everything about me. I don't know anything about you. The only thing I know about you is that you have a traffic ticket here and you're a human being, and that's how I'm going to treat you. And so that really is going a long way. And that's really what I want to do. That's my whole thing. How can I get our community to trust us again, not just the judiciary, but the entire system? So I think I went off on a tangent there, but.
Well, can you talk a little bit more about, since you started the discussion about language, the importance of language. Many times I find that language is sometimes a required subject, you know, in college and in high school, and it's kind of, you're being forced to learn it. You know, how do we communicate to students the importance of language as a way to connect with people, as a way to open worlds, as a way to diversify diversify, to open your mind. Sometimes it's a struggle to do that, you know, especially if you don't live in a Spanish-speaking community.
Sure.
You don't see it, you don't see the importance of it. So can you talk a little bit about language? And it must be difficult to negotiate language in the courtroom, you know, so if you want to listen to someone in Spanish, then how does that work? Is there a translator that translates for the rest of the members of the courtroom? I'm not sure how it
Sure.
works. But
Thank you. Well, so I'll tell you my personal story about language, and I'm actually quite embarrassed about it. So I'm telling you all my stories today, all my embarrassing stories. But growing up, so my parents came to the United States. My father was 10 years old, and he came over with his father from Moroleón, Guanajuato. And at that time, he had already lost his mother. And so it was just him, his three brothers, and my grandpa. And they decided to settle here in Aurora. And my dad was, you know, thrown into the East Aurora school system. And back then, it wasn't like it is today. They put him in like a remedial class because they didn't know what to do with him. And so he did end up learning how to speak English. And so my father spoke English and Spanish very well. My mother, same thing. She came over when she was 8, settled in Aurora with my grandparents, and same thing, got thrown into the East Aurora school system. They were a little bit more gentler with her, and they kept her in the regular classes, but she did learn English and she obviously knew Spanish already. So growing up, fast forward to growing up, you know, here I am, like this 10-year-old girl, and my parents are, you know, they're like, you have to speak Spanish. Tienes que aprender en español. I'm like, okay. And then they're like, we're not going to talk to you or listen to you unless you speak Spanish. So what did I do? I just sat there nice and quiet. I didn't say anything. I was embarrassed about my Spanish because there was a lot of words that I couldn't pronounce right. I didn't wish I knew everything I knew now back then, because I would have never done that. That was a detriment to myself that I was doing that I didn't realize. So now growing up, do I understand Spanish? Absolutely. Can I read it? Yeah. Can I speak it? Kind of chueca. You know, I do the best that I can. There are some words that I don't know, and sometimes I'll look them up. So then the next time I'm putting in a plea, now I know how to say a certain word. You know, and in traffic court, it's a little bit funny, right? Because even in English, you're like, what is this? Like failure to turn left before yielding to blah, blah, blah. And you're like, how do you say that in Spanish? But I do everything I can to make sure. And throughout the process, I look at the person who's pleading out and I say, ¿Me entiendes? You understand me? And they all look at me. And again, they're all so grateful that I'm there and that I can help them. Now, when it comes to trials and where other people are involved, there's a defense attorney or the state's attorney, then we do use an interpreter. It's just easier that way. And obviously the state and the defense attorney need to know what is being said. So for that purpose, we do use an interpreter. But if it's just a straight plea where I'm talking to the individual myself or to a witness outside of a trial, I do all of that myself, just because I find it to be much easier and you get that personal relationship with them. So I will tell you, now that I've been campaigning, the Spanish has been coming back like, whoa. I did an interview with Vivi, and I'm walking around and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be great. And she was like, you ready? Lo vamos a hacer en español. We're going to do it in Spanish. And I looked at her, I was like, what? She was like, oh yeah, my followers speak Spanish. And I'm like, okay. But I thought to myself, you can do this. I mean, just have confidence. And, people again are still going to just appreciate the fact that you're even trying, so that's been my experience. Judge Cruz.
So I had an older brother who was 8 years older, and in California, he went to first grade and got held back because he only spoke Spanish at home. And so my parents made the decision to, my father only spoke English to us growing up, and my mother only spoke Spanish to the rest of us. So we grew up speaking both languages, which as a child, it's the easiest way to learn. And it's pretty seamless. But when I went off to college and then law school, I started losing a lot of it because I wasn't using it very much. This is before cell phones existed. So I would call my parents once every 2 weeks, maybe. And my only Spanish was speaking to my mom for about 2 minutes on the phone once a month or once every 2 weeks. Now, the official language of the courts is English. So it has to be broadcast in English so that if there's English speaking individuals there, they can hear. But what I learned right away, because I started off in the family division, that most people, when they're coming into a court and don't speak the language, first of all, even if you do speak the language, you're nervous. It's, you know, it's a scary process. And you could see individuals walk in, and at the moment they could tell I spoke Spanish, the shoulders would relax. And they'd look up and they'd feel like, okay, this makes me feel a little bit better about the process itself. So routinely what I would do is I would speak directly in Spanish. For example, someone comes in for an order of protection, I have to take testimony. I would speak to them in their native language because I want them to feel comfortable that they understand, that they feel like I understand everything they're saying. And I would have the interpreter speak in English to everybody else. It makes sense to me because I'm there to serve that individual and their needs during that process. I can tell you that COVID has made us as a judiciary think differently than we ever would have before, because now we do a lot of things on Zoom. Now we can get interpreters from around the world for any different language that exists, and more economically as well. Pre-pandemic, we needed an interpreter in, let's say, Tagalog, which is the Philippine language. We would have to bring someone from Chicago. We'd get charged for travel. We'd get charged for mileage. They might only be in the Aurora branch court for 5 minutes, but it would cost the county $600 for that service. Now we can do it on Zoom, get a certified interpreter, so we know that they have the qualifications, and it costs us $60. So we've been able to improve the system because of the pandemic has forced us to do things differently, and we're able to save a little bit of money as well. But like I said, the process is that much more open and welcoming to individuals if you're able to do it in the language. I did make the mistake early on of just doing it in Spanish. And then I was reminded that I needed to prove her because someone could always say, well, the judge didn't give me what I wanted because they said I had to give them money or I had to do something. So I had to protect myself by having someone else in the room that could at least back me up that I was doing things appropriately as well. So I spoke Spanish fluently, but I didn't speak legal. I didn't have a legal vocabulary. And so having a Panamanian mother, a Puerto Rican father, working with an Argentine law partner, my Spanish was all over the place. Had I not spoken Spanish, we would have never been able to serve the Hispanic community that we did. But what I did was I just basically followed the interpreter around the courthouse for a few weeks and just listened and listened and listened. So I could pick up that vocabulary. I'd ask questions. I'd ask her to give me, printouts of legal vocabulary so I could learn it as I went along as an attorney. And as I worked as an attorney, I probably spoke more Spanish on a daily basis than I ever did English. It's somewhat the reverse now, but yeah, language was key for my practice to grow. And then now we can use it to make people feel more comfortable and welcome to the process.
And I know that students can at many of the courthouses and also follow around. A lot of the interpreters that work there and translators and work in the summer. So if anyone's interested, please look into that. I'd like to switch gears a little bit now and ask you to talk about some of the challenges that you have seen, especially since the pandemic began. Some of the social, economic, health challenges that you, as judges, been able to identify, and how have you been able to help in these types of situations?
So the pandemic has forced us out of our comfort zone, which I actually think is a good thing. Had we come up with the idea 2 years ago and said, hey, instead of having everyone come to court, let's just everyone show up on a television screen and do it that way, you'd think we were crazy. But because we were forced into it, we had to innovate. If you recall, the pandemic hit this area just before St. Patrick's Day last year. We originally closed down for 2 weeks, thinking that it was just going to blow through in 2 weeks and then we get right back to normal. But as it kept going, we realized that we couldn't keep the doors closed forever. And Zoom actually and platforms like it have been happening in places like Alaska that are very open and spread out. And we just started learning about it, and the technology starts kicking in. But what we've learned is this. And I was in the family division for 8 years, and now I'm in the criminal division. In the criminal division, we were in the habit of bringing everybody back every 30 days. And that was just, we just felt like a need to see everybody every 30 days to make sure things were going okay. But during the pandemic, we realized that not a whole lot gets done in 30 days. We also realized that who has the luxury of taking a day off from work every 30 days? I know a lot of my clients as an attorney would get charged a point or a quarter point or a half a point for missing a day's work. And a lot of times they would just want to plead guilty because they didn't want to miss work anymore, even though it might not be in their long-term best interest to plead guilty to something. So what we've learned is we really don't need to see everyone on a regular basis like that. If they have an attorney, as long as they're in touch with their attorney, let the attorney work for them. And we would prefer that they be at work so they don't lose a day's pay, so they don't have to make daycare arrangements, so they don't have to drive to the courthouse. For some people, that tank of gas to drive to the courthouse is the tank of gas they need to get to work, to buy groceries or to do other things. So we're able to serve, I believe, the community better by giving them that flexibility of not having to come to court on a regular basis. I actually think we're helping the environment too, because we're not driving as much or requiring people to drive as much either. It was early on in the pandemic when I was the presiding judge of the family division, and we were asked to shut down, and I decided we could not because I knew the pandemic was going to affect families' incomes, it was going to affect parenting issues. So we jumped into Zoom right away within like 3 days, and we started coming up with rules that would allow us to conduct court proceedings on Zoom. If any of you don't have a Zoom license, for example, when we started, we didn't have a license. So when you don't have a license and you start a meeting, you get kicked off at 40 minutes. And so we were running court that way. We would get kicked off. And when I got the warning, we were about to get kicked off, I said, everybody, we're about to get kicked off, but jump right back in. We're going to keep going. And we did that for a couple of months before we could actually get the licensing to do it otherwise. But early on, I remember doing a hearing, and it involved a police officer with the husband, and the spouse worked downtown Chicago. And the hearing only lasted minutes. And I could see that the police officer was on his phone and he was in the lobby of the police department. So he was able to not leave work and just basically do it from the lobby of the police department. And the spouse worked in Chicago because you could see the skyline behind her from the office she was in. And it just dawned on me that had we, in the past, required them to come to court, there's no way she could have been and then been working in Chicago that day. We would have taken a police officer off the streets who's there to serve and protect, to make them come to court as well. And it was a no-brainer. We had to find a way to make this kind of process continue. And we got a lot of pushback from the attorneys because it was just change is scary for some people. But as the pandemic started to lessen a little bit and we started looking at options for, do we come back more in person or do we keep doing more on Zoom? The attorney's like, no, we love the Zoom now because now it's become a part of how they do things. Rather than have the clients come to the courthouse and they come to the courthouse, clients can come to their office, they can Zoom in from wherever they're at. Their clients are happier, which makes the attorneys happier. It drops down the cost. So that's where the court system has benefited and has become a little bit more accessible for individuals. I've been pleased in my courtroom now, my criminal court, the gentleman might be in another country. And so that would not happen. The cost expense of those things happening might have been prohibitive. And might have had these other consequences for people to spend money and maybe lose employment if we didn't do it this way. So, I tell people that we always use this phrase thinking outside the box. I really think we threw the old box out and we're really trying to redefine what that new box looks like because the possibilities are somewhat endless as to what we can offer now with the technology that's out there.
That a little bit as it relates for traffic, a lot of that is just financial. I will tell you that the majority of the people that come through my courtroom are going to get supervision and a fine, and they have to pay that fine with 3, 6, 9, 12 months. And what I've found is that a lot of people that are still struggling with the effects of the pandemic come into court on their end date. And, I address a lot of the post-sentence cases and I talk to them and they say, they tell me their entire story of what has happened since they pled out. And I let them, right? Because they just want to be heard and I'm going to give them that opportunity. But at the end, here's their plea. Can you please, please, please just give me some more time to pay this? And in my mind, I'm like, absolutely. Because what's the alternative? That we give you a conviction and we send everything to collections? That jams somebody up. That's a conviction on their record, on their driving record. And so everything and anything that I can do And this is what I tell them, anything I can do to help you maintain supervision and pay your fines off, I'll give you all the time that you need. You tell me, how much time do you need? Can you give me 3 months? I'll give you 4 months. Because if you think 4 months will get it paid, then we'll do that. I mean, this is a situation, I'm in a courtroom and I'm very lucky to be in this courtroom because it's fines. That's all it is. The majority of the time, it's just money. We'll figure this out. And I've had a lot of people come before the court and they tell me, I don't have a job. I don't have anything right now. I don't have the money to pay this. And I have a conversation with them. Listen, I don't want you to have a conviction on your driving record. Let's work this out. What if we give you 6 months? We'll kick it out for 6 months. In those 6 month period, make $25 one month, $25 the next month, and ongoing. If you pay it off before the next 6 months, you don't have to come back to court. If you don't come back, we'll talk about this. You're still going to be on supervision, but just let's work this out. It's better than a conviction. So really anything that I help to make sure that people don't get jammed up with convictions, that's really what I'm all about. Another thing that I see a lot is people need continuances. They get this driving while license suspended ticket, right? And you think to yourself, as a prosecutor, I was like, why don't I just pay the reinstatement fee? It's not that easy. That's what I've learned in the little 3 months that I've been here. It's really not that easy. I know Jackie Leader's laughing because it's not that easy. I had someone tell me today, I have $6,000 that I need to pay off. Who has that type of money? That's what my thought was. How will you ever pay that off? But I asked him, do you want time to pay that off? Or do you want to talk to the state about an offer today? And he said, no, I want to do everything that I can to try to pay it off. And when people go and they actually do everything that the Secretary of State is asking them to get those driver's license reinstated, it's a sense of pride for me too when I see that they had a Class A where they could have gone to jail for 364 days. Now they've been able to get their license and reduce it down to a petty, just money fine. I tell them, I'm proud of you. Really good job on getting your driver's license back. You just went from an A to a petty offense. It takes a lot of work, but this is the type of stuff that in this courtroom, I have the luxury of doing. Let's work, let's figure this out. It's traffic. So let's make sure that we can keep a conviction off your record, give you the time that you need to pay, or give you the time that you need to get your driver's license reinstated. The pandemic is there's still aftermath of it, and people are still struggling from that. And everyone's like, well, there's jobs out there. I don't know why people aren't working. It takes a while, right? So if someone's been unemployed and they barely got a job, I don't think they're thinking of, I should really pay my $432.50 fine when I'm so backed up on the mortgage, on the insurance, on paying other bills. Those come more important, in my opinion, than the traffic ticket fine. We'll figure that out. Maybe that's not a popular thought, but I think it's the right thought for the community. And so that's what I'm trying to do to kind of help and make sure that people really avoid the nasty consequences of what a conviction could do. I kind of mess with the mics now.
You're doing a lot to let people be heard, and it seems like that's what's going to make the difference. Well, I'd like to open it up now to questions from the audience. So please feel free to raise your hand, speak loudly. I'll try to get the mic over to you. First, I'll see you. You both have such inspiring stories, and I'm wondering, you mentioned a little bit about how COVID had an impact on you, and Judge Cruz about going from a large law firm to now going to the bottom of the totem pole in the judiciary. And this isn't limited on the Latino experience, but on the spectrum of the human experience, what are some of those other obstacles that could have prevented you from rising up or keeping your eyes up as you rise to your current position that would be valuable for a student who's trying to graduate college, or for a professor who's trying to keep post-COVID students engaged, or for the mid-level professional who is also trying to do the same in their community? What insights or lessons learned from others have helped stabilize you and then motivate you to that next level?
Well, on a very personal level, you know, one of the main things that has always motivated me and it kind of kept the noise out growing up were my parents. I was so fortunate to have my mother and father that, you know, they didn't have the luxury of education. So my mother, after she graduated from high school, was forced to go, asked to go work in the family business. And so college for her was not an option. And same thing with my father. When he graduated from high school, he had lost both of his parents at the time. Children now had to provide for them. Didn't have the luxury of telling me, listen, this is what you do. You go to college, you do this. They didn't have that. But they did have something very valuable, and that was hard dedication. They instilled those values on all three of their children from early on. And they would always tell us, all three of us, you have to work hard in this life. You know, you're a minority, you're a woman, you have to work 10 times harder than everyone else. And so I had that going in my mind, and with my education, I had nonstop. And I did everything I could to make sure that I would make them proud, because they made a lot of sacrifices for us, for their 3 kids. And I felt like I had to give them a good return on their investments, you know. But growing up, there was a lot of negativity. You know, when I was in high school, I had a guidance counselor tell me, you know, I went in and I saw all these people like, oh, I'm going to this college, I'm going to this. And here I am my senior year, and I'm like, where am I going? Am I supposed to be going somewhere? And so I went in there to her and I said, so I want to go to college. And she's like, oh, no, college is not for you. Here are some trade school books, or maybe we can get you into one of the factories. At that time, there was a big factory it's across the street from Martin. The name's escaping me, but she said, how about you go there? And that's the type of notes that I'm telling you about. That's the type of thing that could really discourage someone from continuing to go forward. Same thing with that pamphlet in law school. I mean, I remember getting that pamphlet, going home and crying to my mom, like, what am I going to do? They're telling me here that I'm not going to pass. They're telling me that I'm going to fail. What do I do now? And so it was their motivation. My mother and my father have always been, you know what my mom did after I told her that? Later on, you know, on the weekend, she went to the store, picked out a card, a card that had a motivational stuff in it, and she just signed it. Love. I carried that with. See, these are the personal stories you shouldn't be listening to, but I carried it in my planner until I graduated, and even when I was taking the bar exam, and the days that I would feel like, they're right, I'm gonna fail, I would read it. And I'm like, con todas las ganas, Bianca, do it. So, I mean, that really, for me, it was my parents. They're the ones that gave me all the motivation in the world, and without them, I wouldn't be here. That's for sure.
You're right. Being one of the few Hispanic attorneys in Aurora wasn't enough. You know, I immersed myself in the constantly looking for opportunities to volunteer, inspire. Again, that responsibility of being the first, weighed on me heavily. And then, at becoming, I did that as an attorney, and then as a judge, it just continued. So as I was looking at that challenge of bringing in more diversity, I was looking for lawyers that would be interested. And I fell in the same position that chief judge that was asking me to become a judge was in, because I had to convince people that this is what it meant. And this is a challenge that the community needed, and it was desperately waiting for. So resources are out there. And so I've tried my best, and Judge Camargo has as well, to be as much a part of the community outside of our 9-to-5 job as we possibly can. And I just received that community service award from my bar association because I try to be that role model, that example. And you'll find me this Friday, for example, at the Interfaith Food Pantry, loading up shelves, delivering food to veterans, here. And as your neighbor, you eat at the same restaurants you do, shop at the same stores. I'll mow you lawn if you need help. So that we have to be those role models. Again, my chosen profession is law. If you have a profession that you'd like to hear from a role model, and you can find me, and I'll find you a doctor, a business owner, someone that can mentor you and guide you, because they're out there. But what I think gets us where we're at is that passion for putting that noise aside and saying, why not? I shared a little bit earlier, when I first got sworn in, there was celebration. And in that room, I went out and I found a lawyer that I knew was trying to be a judge for a while. And I said to him, Reggie, I'm not going to stop until you become a judge. And when I got sworn into a church a few years later, again, we had a ceremony and I found him again. And I said, Reggie, I'm not going to stop until I'm a judge. And he came in a little bit after we started, but I want to Campbell in the background there. Judge Campbell in the African American community is where everybody goes to for their legal needs. He was that beacon of light for everyone in that community. And although he also knew what he meant to those clients, and he knew the sacrifice it would be to no longer be an attorney, but what it means to have him on the bench as a judge, so that individuals, because we have a lot of Hispanic, the majority of people that actually come through our courthouse doors are Hispanic and Black. He knows what it means for someone to walk in and see someone that looks like them on the bench, to make them feel like they're going to get a fair shake, they're going to get the respect they deserve. So those are the kinds of things that, again, put the noise aside, put your head down, but always look up and make sure you're constantly trying to improve things for others. We go into middle school, we go into high school, we talk about problems that might derail them in life, social media problems, bullying, sexting, things like that, then that one lapse of judgment can cause some permanent damage that might keep you from your chosen career. So be preventative so that those things don't happen, so that they can achieve whatever they wish to achieve. But there aren't that many Hispanic lawyers, there aren't that many Black lawyers. So, I started in law schools and went through universities, then went to high school, then middle school. Just being there so that people can see there's no reason that you can't be the same as this little kid who grew up in Panama playing football barefoot. That's my story, could be your story, just like Judge Camargo's story, just like Reggie Campbell's story. Put the noise aside and just keep working.
Thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Very important question. Yes.
I can tell you firsthand two examples. My mother was always a volunteer in the military. So I was the youngest of three. So by the time I came along, my father's career was a little bit more advanced. And my mom, because she had already experienced being the Hispanic wife to a soldier, was constantly mentoring other Hispanic women whose husbands just joined and they're now finding themselves in another country and they don't know anything. And it didn't matter where they were from. She just kind of gradually put these groups together for Hispanic women that came from all sorts of cultures. So they were united in the fact that they couldn't speak English and they were different, or they couldn't speak English and they were different than everybody else. But as the population started to grow, people started to separate because you found commonality with others. So same thing happened in Aurora. And one of the goals I had as the president of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce was to try and unite the Puerto Rican Cultural Council with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And although they are supportive, then even the Mexican communities, when you're from the state of Durango or you're from another one, is that you find that you have commonality with smaller groups. And sometimes it's just logical to spend more time with them because you have more in common. That's kind of a challenge, as you mentioned, because really your strength is in your commonality. And it's at some point, it's in someone else's interest to keep you divided. But it's a real challenge as the numbers grew, and I'm not sure what the solution is, but as the numbers grew, we start seeing more division into individual groups instead of finding a common bond that would actually give you the power, the influence that I think the Hispanic community could really have.
I'll be very brief with this one and what I've seen with my experience. I've been out in the community a lot, especially in Aurora, and what I see is that Aurora is becoming very much, not that it wasn't in the past, but it's very accepting of other cultures, and it is celebrating all cultures. I mean, we just recently put up a Greek statue in near one of the parks. I mean, again, 10 years ago, maybe something that might have been unheard of. And so you have the Dia de los Muertos event, you have this Greek sculpture coming up. I mean, I feel like Aurora is really turning a leaf. And if there might have been, even within the Hispanic entities, I feel like everyone's kind of merging together. We went to a national night out, and there was a Puerto Rican organization there. And, you know, clearly they've realized that I wasn't Puerto Rican right away, but they're like, hey, join our group. And I'm like, I sure will. You know, to me, it's more inviting and more accepting. That's really what my experience, obviously growing up, you know, in high school, there was this cliquiness, right? Puerto Ricans and then Mexicans, and then that was pretty much all it was. But I think as you grow up and you kind of see, hey, we're all in the same boat here. Why don't we band together and just embrace and celebrate our culture? And that's what I really see in Aurora. And so I'm very proud and very pleased to see that.
La unión hace la fuerza. Together we're stronger.
So I'm in a project as an outsider from the community looking into the Aurora community immigrant resources because I want to become an immigration attorney, and I'm not immigrant, so I really just want to learn everything I can so I can best serve the community. So I guess, like, what resources do you notice in Aurora that have been really helpful? What do you think needs to be added?
So there are groups, World Relief is one of them, Family Focus is another one, and you know, we see a lot of duplication of services sometimes too, but that's where, I don't know if you're familiar with them or if you've met with them or not. Yeah, and I can introduce you to individuals from both of those. They you know, because a lot of those organizations are not profit and they're grant-based, their missions are different, so they might overlap. But for you, you know, I was a board member for Family Focus when they brought in an immigration attorney house so that they could help with that issue. And so they're constantly striving in those, but you know, grants sometimes make you pigeonhole what you do. So they may work together sometimes, but they might overlap sometimes as well. But it's there. There are a lot of, when I first started practicing law, there were no immigration lawyers that I could think of in Aurora at that time. Now there's several. They're all over. And it's really tough because a lot of the immigration work that happens, you have to go to Chicago to do it. So it's difficult for someone to commit to spend a whole day on certain things. And over the last 4 years, we know that immigration laws have changed significantly. So you could be in the middle of an immigration process thinking that you're right about to get the relief you want, and the law changes and you have to start all over again. So it's not easy. But there are definitely resources out there. And after we're done, I can give you the names of some individuals.
We came to hook up with one of the immigration attorneys. It's a very specified area, and I feel it's a very specified area. So I think the best way to learn what the resources are is to be teamed up with an immigration attorney. That would be my best advice. You know, there's NIU alum that has a firm in Aurora, and he is a mover and a shaker. And so even spending a couple of days, you know him already. Is it Jeremy? No.
He went to work for Family Focus way back when.
Oh, I just heard of him.
Yeah. He was the one that brought it to Family Focus. And my former law office actually hired a retired immigration law judge, and that worked for my former law office for about 2 years. But now with all the backlog in immigration cases, she got called back. And so now she's back working as an immigration law judge.
I mean, that would if I'm shadowing that and learning.
Thank you. Now, we have about left. I guess I would ask you a question about what we can do, what we can do to become more connected to our students, connected to Aurora that is so close by, is our neighbor. What types of contributions, how can we participate and contribute? Do you have advice for us as students, as faculty, as college, that community? Positive ways.
I will tell you that I told this the other day, to me, downtown Aurora is turning into downtown Naperville. I mean, every single night you can find something to do. There's little coffee shops that have music. There's events every single night and weekend. I mean, you want to talk about finding something to do, there's always something. And I feel like if you can go out and support the small businesses and our Latino business, not just Latino businesses, support the small businesses and just kind of get out there, do community service like Judge Cruz was talking about. There are so many organizations that I've encountered in just a short amount of time that do service a lot of minorities in Aurora, that you are, I mean, just little things. Give a little donation. Someone told me a $25 donation to our organization keeps our refrigerator full for a week. I mean, think about how much you spend in groceries and how much $25 can give. So, I mean, as a college, what you can do, as a student, what you could do, there's a luxury of being a student right now, right? There's a lot of work that you have to do on the front end with your coursework, but, you're not, the majority of you, the traditional students are married, you don't have children, a lot of time on weekends maybe. Go out, volunteer, get involved with the city of Aurora. And if you follow them on social media, they're constantly posting what they have going on. So that would be my, and if you want to be more involved in the way the criminal justice system works, shadowing a judge, coming in and watching the court call, talking about the process, watching a bench trial, watching a jury trial, having those experiences and then asking questions about that. I have a group of students that are coming in to watch my court call, and I'm thrilled to have them. I want to make sure that they understand this is not a situation that you want to be in, but if you are, you have judges like us that are going to sit here and help you through the process. So that's, as a student, getting involved and volunteering, I think is
I'd suggest Aurora University is a very diverse student body. They have like a LASO group, Latin American Student Organization. Come here, connect with them, have them come here, you guys go there, so you can learn and meet and learn about each other. Naperville, this downtown's been thriving for a long time, so there's everything you need is here. And Aurora's at that place too, but we are in Aurora one of the most diverse. As Judge Camargo mentioned, in the last 45 days, we celebrated the Greek culture, Diwali, the Hispanic culture, our East Asian culture, South Asian culture. So there's plenty of opportunities and events that the city tries to promote. They have a parent boards too for almost every diverse group that we have as well. But just come down and watch. It's a lot of fun. But at your age, I remember being a college student. That's when you really can have an impact on the community, the world. You start to kind of frame your thoughts and ideas about what you want to be and what you want the world to look like. There's a whole group of them over at Aurora University too who are in that same mindset. So, it's like, make them a sister college. You're just making a sister group. And it's a time. You'll about them as they will about you for sure.
Is there a Latino organization here in North Central?
There are three separate organizations. The Latino organization. There is Fusión Española that does a lot of events. There's also La Malin an education organization which volunteers to do community possible. So always looking for opportunities.
So I can tell you, we just had yesterday our first school group, because we used to have school groups come into the courthouse all the time. Yesterday was the first time we've had a group come in since COVID happened. And we as lawyers, but judges in particular, we're all very competitive by nature. And so we weren't able to do a whole lot. So I put together a softball game last year between, we had a team of judges, a team from the State's Attorney's Office, and a team from the Public Defender's Office. It was right around, we played in August, so right when things were kind of calming down, but everyone had this just COVID fatigue. And even though we're in the same building, everyone's locked into their own little offices and rooms because you're kind of safe. And we played a softball game that evening that just let everybody let loose with all of that tension and stress and everything. I'm going to tell you, although I probably don't have to, that the judges won all the games they played. But those are the kind of things. So I believe in competition, you know, challenging them to. The more we get to learn about.
Thank you very much, Justice Cruz and Camargo. You are definitely great and wonderful mentors, and we can all, of course, be mentors as well to everyone that is around us. So thank you for all the ideas and for your advice and for the stories that have really impacted us. And thank you for this important that you the difference. So thank you very much. Thank you, Steve Lasik and Jackie for the connections, and Professor Jelena also for helping in order. Very much.
Just a resource, feel free to share with our team wants to reach out directly for anything. If you just have a question about should I go to law school, please use this.
Thank you so much for your